Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937, in the village of Al-Ajah near Tikrit in northern Iraq. Raised in one of the poorest areas of the country, Saddam came from humble beginnings as the son of peasants. His father died before he was born, and he went on to live with his uncle in Baghdad at an early age. Despite a rough start in life and growing up in poverty, Saddam's journey into power began when he joined the Ba'ath Party in 1957. Just 2 years later, in 1959, he took part in a daring and ultimately unsuccessful attempt by the Ba'athists to assassinate the Iraqi Prime Minister Abd al-Karim Qasim. The attempt failed, and Saddam was wounded but managed to escape first to Syria and then to Egypt. While in Egypt, he attended Cairo Law School between 1962 and 1963 before continuing his studies at Baghdad Law College after the Ba'athists briefly seized power in Iraq in 1963. However, that regime did not last long, and Saddam was imprisoned for several years after the Ba'athists were overthrown. He later escaped from prison and rose within the ranks to become one of the Ba'ath Party's most influential leaders. He played a key role in the 1968 coup that restored the Ba'ath Party to power in Iraq. From that point, Saddam effectively shared control of the country alongside President Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr. One of Saddam's major moves came in 1972 when he orchestrated the nationalization of Iraq's oil industry, a powerful step that gave the country greater control over its oil wealth and significantly boosted its economy. Saddam eventually became president of Iraq in 1979, and his reign would be marked by brutal leadership and costly wars against neighboring countries. He held on to power until 2003, leaving behind a legacy of controversy and conflict that shaped Iraq's modern history. In 1979, Saddam Hussein took full control of Iraq's government after the resignation of President Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr. He stepped into multiple powerful roles, becoming not only president, but also chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council and prime minister. With these titles, Saddam centralized authority entirely in his hands and ruled with an iron grip. He relied on a vast and ruthless secret police network to crush any form of dissent or opposition within the country. To solidify his dominance, he crafted an enormous personality cult, portraying himself as the heroic savior of the Iraqi people. As president, Saddam had grand ambitions. He wanted to take over Egypt's role as the leader of the Arab world and to dominate the Persian Gulf region. In pursuit of that vision, he launched an invasion of Iran in September 1980, targeting the country's oil-rich borderlands. However, what was expected to be a swift victory turned into a brutal and prolonged war of attrition. The conflict dragged on for years, draining Iraq's resources and halting its oil exports. The financial strain forced Saddam to scale back his grand plans for economic development and modernization. Still, the war raged on until 1988, when both Iraq and Iran finally agreed to a ceasefire, bringing an end to the 8-year conflict. By the time the dust settled, Iraq was burdened with massive foreign debt, and its economy was struggling. Yet despite the toll of the war, Saddam did not slow down. Instead, he doubled down on strengthening Iraq's military power, continuing to build up his armed forces as he prepared for whatever came next. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein made a bold and dangerous move by ordering the Iraqi army to invade and occupy neighboring Kuwait. His goal appeared to be the seizure of Kuwait's immense oil wealth to revive Iraq's struggling economy, which had been battered by years of war. But the world reacted swiftly and decisively. The occupation triggered an immediate and widespread international backlash, leading to a global trade embargo against Iraq. Despite mounting pressure, Saddam refused to withdraw. He ignored multiple appeals and warnings, even as a massive United States-led military force gathered in Saudi Arabia and the United Nations passed resolutions condemning Iraq's actions and authorizing the use of force. The standoff escalated into the Persian Gulf War, which erupted on January 16, 1991. It lasted just 6 weeks. The Allied coalition launched a devastating offensive that quickly drove Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. Iraq's humiliating defeat on the battlefield sparked internal uprisings, particularly from Shia and Kurdish groups. But Saddam responded with brutal repression. He unleashed his security forces to crush the rebellions, forcing thousands to flee to refugee camps near the northern border. Countless others were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Many simply vanished into the shadows of notorious prisons like Abu Ghraib. As part of the ceasefire terms with the United Nations, Iraq was forbidden from developing or possessing weapons of mass destruction, including chemical, biological, and nuclear arms. Until Iraq complied, a series of punishing international sanctions remained in place. These sanctions devastated the Iraqi economy and led to widespread suffering among ordinary Iraqis. Still, Saddam remained defiant. His refusal to fully cooperate with UN weapons inspectors led to a 4-day bombing campaign in 1998 by the United States and Great Britain known as Operation Desert Fox. Both countries pledged support to the Iraqi opposition in an effort to remove Saddam from power. During this time, Saddam tightened his grip on the country and began preparing for succession by grooming one of his sons, Uday or Qusay, to take over. Both were promoted to high-ranking positions and became infamous for their own brutal behavior, continuing the legacy of violence and fear. Saddam's hold on power at home remained unshaken, and his anti-American rhetoric only grew louder. Though loathed by many within Iraq, Saddam became a controversial symbol in the Arab world, viewed by some as the only leader willing to openly defy what they saw as Western, particularly American, aggression. After the devastating September 11th attacks in the United States in 2001, the American government shifted its focus to the possibility that Saddam Hussein might supply terrorist groups with chemical or biological weapons. This suspicion reignited efforts to push for Iraq's disarmament. In a move to ease international pressure, Saddam allowed United Nations weapons inspectors to return to Iraq in November 2002. However, his cooperation was seen as incomplete and insincere by both the United States and Great Britain. Frustration grew quickly, and diplomatic efforts were soon declared a failure. On March 17, 2003, U.S. President George W. Bush issued a final ultimatum, demanding that Saddam step down from power and leave Iraq within 48 hours or face war. Bush made it clear that even if Saddam agreed to leave, U.S. forces might still be needed to stabilize the country and hunt down any remaining weapons of mass destruction. Saddam, true to his defiant character, refused to back down. Just 3 days later, on March 20th, the Iraq War began. The opening strike was a precision-air assault targeting a bunker complex where Saddam was believed to be meeting his inner circle. Though the attempt failed to eliminate him, the message was unmistakable. Taking Saddam out was a top priority. With his trademark defiance, Saddam called on the Iraqi people to resist and sacrifice their lives to defend the nation. But the resistance quickly collapsed. By April 9th, U.S. troops rolled into Baghdad and Saddam vanished into the shadows. As chaos engulfed the capital, he fled with a large portion of Iraq's national treasury. Despite an intense manhunt, he initially managed to stay hidden. His sons, Uday and Qusay, met their end on July 22nd in Mosul during a deadly confrontation with U.S. forces. Saddam, however, remained at large until December 13th. That day, American troops finally closed in on him near Tikrit. In a dramatic moment that captured global attention, The former Iraqi president was found disheveled and dirty, hiding in a small underground hole near a farmhouse. Though he was armed, Saddam offered no resistance and surrendered without firing a shot. The once powerful and feared leader was now a fugitive in defeat, pulled from hiding as the world watched the fall of a dictator. In October 2005, Saddam Hussein was brought to trial before the Iraqi High Tribunal, a special court created to prosecute former officials of his regime. The case centered around a brutal incident that took place in 1982 in the predominantly Shiite town of Al-Dajail, where Saddam and several of his associates were accused of orchestrating the killing of 148 townspeople following an assassination attempt against him. The trial lasted 9 months and was marked by high drama and frequent disruptions. Saddam repeatedly interrupted the court proceedings with angry and defiant outbursts, insisting that the entire trial was illegitimate and controlled by United States interests. He portrayed himself not as a criminal, but as a victim of foreign interference and political vengeance. Despite his protests, the tribunal continued and eventually concluded its work in July 2006. The verdicts were announced in November, and the outcome was decisive. Saddam was found guilty of crimes against humanity, including willful killing, illegal imprisonment, deportation, and torture. The court sentenced him to death by hanging. Alongside him, Saddam's half-brother, who had served as a senior intelligence officer, and Iraq's former chief judge were also handed death sentences for their roles in the atrocities. As the world watched closely, the final chapter of Saddam's life unfolded rapidly. Just days after Iraq's appeals court upheld the sentence, in December 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed. The man who once ruled Iraq with absolute authority and struck fear into millions met his end at the hands of the very people he once oppressed, bringing a dramatic and symbolic close to a dark and violent era in the country's history. The Persian Gulf War of 1990 to 1991 was a major international conflict that erupted when Iraq, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, invaded and occupied Kuwait on August 2, 1990. Saddam's move stunned the world and sent shockwaves through the region. His apparent objectives were clear to many observers. He wanted to seize Kuwait's vast oil reserves, cancel the billions of dollars Iraq owed to Kuwait from the Iran-Iraq War, and establish Iraq as the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. This conflict marked the first major international crisis of the post-Cold War era and would go on to shape how military force was used on the global stage for years to come. In the months leading up to the invasion, tensions in the Gulf region were steadily rising. During the summer of 1990, Iraq's rhetoric grew more aggressive, particularly toward Kuwait and the ruling Sabah family. On July 17th, Saddam delivered a fiery televised speech, accusing Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates of violating OPEC oil quotas and causing a drop in oil prices that hurt Iraq's economy. The next day, Iraq accused Kuwait of stealing oil from the Al Rumaila oil field, which lies on the border between the two nations. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis quickly fell apart. Talks held in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, on August 1st collapsed without any resolution. Then, just hours after those talks ended, Iraqi armored divisions rolled across the Kuwaiti border in the early hours of August 2nd. The invasion came as a shock, especially after Saddam had personally assured Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak that Iraq would not resort to force. This act of aggression set the stage for a massive global response and launched a conflict that would have lasting consequences for the region and the world. The resistance to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait may have been short-lived, but it was fierce and tragic. For about 14 hours, Kuwaitis fought back with everything they had, and during that time an estimated 4,200 of them lost their lives in combat. Even after the initial assault, remnants of Kuwait's 20,000-man army held their ground and put up a spirited fight for another 36 hours. But despite their bravery, Iraqi forces managed to take control of Kuwait City with relative ease. The most intense fighting erupted at Dasman Palace, the royal residence of Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Ab. There, hand-to-hand combat raged for hours before the palace finally fell, and in the battle the emir's younger brother, Sheikh Fahad, was killed. At 11:11 a.m. on August 3rd, Kuwait radio went silent, leaving behind a desperate plea that echoed across the Arab world. Arabs, brothers, beloved brothers, Muslims, hurry to our aid. As Iraqi forces tightened their grip, Sheikh Jabir, his cabinet, and senior members of the Ab family fled into Saudi Arabia, where they set up a government in exile. Crown Prince Saad al-Abdallah al-Salim al-Ab quickly rose as the group's most prominent figure, while Finance Minister Sheikh Ali al-Khalifa al-Ab took control of Kuwait's massive overseas assets, valued at around $100 billion. Meanwhile, as many as 350,000 Kuwaiti refugees made their way to safety in Saudi Arabia. On August 4th, Iraq appointed Colonel Saddam Hussein Ali as head of state in occupied Kuwait. Backed by a cabinet of so-called revolutionaries, Iraq claimed these officials had overthrown the old regime. Just 4 days later, Iraq tried to legitimize its control by establishing the Provisional Free Government of Kuwait, insisting that the invasion was a response to the wishes of Kuwaitis opposed to the ruling Ab family. On August 10th, foreign diplomats in Kuwait were given 2 weeks to shut their embassies and move to Baghdad. And on August 28th, Saddam made his boldest declaration yet. He announced that Kuwait was no longer a separate country but the 19th province of Iraq. Iraqi authorities moved quickly to erase Kuwaiti identity. Place names were changed, and Iraq's Al-Bara province was expanded to absorb strategic Kuwaiti areas, including the Al-Rumaila oil field and the islands of Bibiyan and Al-Warba. What followed during the occupation was a campaign of terror. Iraqi troops looted the country and committed widespread atrocities. Despite official orders declaring the death penalty for looters, Iraqi forces stripped hospitals of medical equipment, stole millions from the central bank, and emptied the Kuwait National Museum of priceless Islamic art. Amnesty International reported that Iraqi forces executed civilians without trial and detained thousands more. One of the most shocking stories of the war claimed Iraqi soldiers removed infants from incubators in a hospital. That claim was later revealed to be false, but it had already shaped public opinion and stirred outrage around the world. The occupation of Kuwait was not just a political takeover. It was a human catastrophe marked by suffering, violence, and the ruthless plundering of a nation. The world wasted no time in responding to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Just 4 days after the attack, on August 6th, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 661. This powerful measure imposed a sweeping trade ban on Iraq and urged all UN member states to safeguard the financial assets of Kuwait's legitimate government. The very next day, the United States deployed its first troops to Saudi Arabia, marking the beginning of a military buildup that would shape the months to come. Meanwhile, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak called an emergency Arab League summit in Cairo to rally regional support. On August 10th, 12 out of the 21 Arab League nations came together to condemn Iraq's invasion and support the UN resolution. Yet, not all Arab countries stood with Kuwait. Iraq found sympathizers in Jordan, Yemen, Sudan, Tunisia, Algeria, and the Palestine Liberation Organization. On the other side, Kuwait's staunchest allies included Saudi Arabia and the Arab Gulf states, joined by Egypt and Syria, who had recently mended ties. Saddam responded to the mounting pressure with defiance. On August 12th, he proposed that all regional occupation disputes, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, should be resolved simultaneously and under the same UN principles. He then made a surprising diplomatic pivot. On August 15th, Saddam announced Iraq's readiness to end its long-standing conflict with Iran. He agreed to withdraw Iraqi forces from Iranian territory, settle the contentious Shah al-Arab waterway dispute, and exchange prisoners of war. While the Soviet Union initially hesitated to take a firm stance, it eventually backed the U.S. military presence in the Gulf by September 3rd. As the political maneuvering continued, the situation inside occupied Kuwait grew even more dire. More than 600,000 expatriates, including around 7,000 Western nationals, were trapped in the country. Iraqi forces blocked their exit and soon began rounding up hundreds of foreigners. Some were held at key military and industrial sites, used as human shields against potential airstrikes. Then, in a move that shocked the world, Saddam announced on August 28 that women and children would be allowed to leave. Yet thousands remained, and their plight drew global attention. A parade of high-profile figures journeyed to Baghdad, pleading for the hostages' release. Among them were former British Prime Minister Edward Heath, Labour Party politician Tony Benn, American boxing legend Muhammad Ali, and British singer and activist Yusuf Islam, formerly known as Cat Stevens. Then, in a dramatic turn on December 6th, Saddam declared that all remaining hostages would be freed. This decision aligned with UN Security Council Resolution 674, which demanded an immediate end to the hostage-taking. But even as the last captives were released, Iraq's occupation of Kuwait and the looming threat to Saudi Arabia, home to the world's largest oil reserves, remained unresolved. The international community knew that the crisis was far from over, and tensions in the Gulf continued to rise.